The latest coronavirus numbers show Germany has had a dramatic spike in new cases over the past day. The country has hit a new high of nearly 30,000 cases, and nearly 600 people have died, the highest daily total yet. Weeks of partial lockdown haven't slowed the spread of infection enough. Much tougher restrictions seem almost inevitable now, with political momentum building for a harder lockdown over the holidays.
With only 2 weeks to go until Christmas, the looming question across Germany is, will a hard lockdown come before or after the holidays? At its weekly briefing on Wednesday, Germany's Robert Koch Institute said it was alarmed and that it was bracing for a significant increase in case numbers. The situation could easily tip again, leading to rapid exponential growth. The situation is especially problematic in assisted living facilities. According to German authorities, residents of nursing homes are at more risk than ever.
Currently, we're seeing double the amount of outbreaks in assisted living facilities than in spring, and every outbreak affects a lot of people.
Several German states are now considering tightening the measures already in place. Berlin's government is considering closing all non-essential retail before Christmas, the busiest period of the year. Winter break may be extended, and schools could return to distance learning.
I believe these 2.5 to 3 weeks will give us plenty of opportunities regarding disease control.
State leaders are now hoping to set out a coordinated plan in a meeting with Chancellor Angela Merkel.
The gathering looks likely to take place on Sunday. We're very interested in getting together as quickly as possible in order to rapidly gain clarity about the path our country will follow.
In light of recent developments, religious services over the holidays are also being scrutinized.
If there is a possibility of a religious gathering endangering lives, I'll be the first to call things off.
The so-called most wonderful time of the year, now marked by deep concerns. A new lockdown in Germany isn't a matter of if, but rather when.
DW reporter Julia Saldelli joins me now. Julia, give us some perspective here. How worrying are these latest numbers?
They're definitely concerning, especially if we consider that there are measures in place to try to contain the spread of the virus. And just yesterday, the head of Germany's disease control agency said the situation is worrying. We could even see a spiraling of cases again going into exponential growth. The virus is widespread across the country, and what is most worrying is that we see an increase in cases in older age group. These are the age groups that are at higher risk from COVID-19, and that's why we've seen an increase in intensive care beds and in deaths recently. Now, even if we compare Germany to other countries, for example, the US, which is not seen as a beacon of responsibility in dealing with the pandemic and not a successful example necessarily, we see that the incidence of COVID-19 in the US is at 63 cases per 100,000 inhabitants over 7 days. In Germany, that number stands at 149.
Julie, as you well know, Germany introduced a partial lockdown at the start of November. It certainly doesn't appear to have worked. So what exactly went wrong?
Yeah, the partial lockdown is not working. It was meant to bring down cases significantly before Christmas so that measures could be slightly relaxed over the Christmas holidays and people could enjoy the holidays better. That has not happened. If we look at countries in Europe, for example, Ireland or Belgium, they implemented a tougher, shorter lockdown, which was able to bring cases down significantly and almost stop the virus in its tracks. That has not happened in Germany. That is also because there was not political consensus around tougher measures to be implemented in the last few weeks, and therefore we only saw a partial lockdown come into effect. But that is starting to change now with these really worrying numbers.
What measures are likely to be taken now?
So we've seen already some states implement measures in this past week. We are looking at the recommendations of Germany's Academy of Science. We are likely going to see the school holidays extended by a week until January 10th. We are looking at shop closures, non-essential shops remaining closed. And we will wait for a meeting between Merkel and Angela Merkel, Germany's chancellor, and the 16 state leaders to decide whether to go ahead with a national common approach with the rules. The question is whether they will come into place before Christmas or right afterwards. We have to keep in mind that it is an important time of the year for shops. It's the Christmas buying period, so it is going to be a difficult decision to take.
Julia Saudelli. Thank you, Julia. And Europe still has a long wait ahead for vaccine. Regulators will meet just over 2 weeks from now on December 29th to decide if the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine is fit for mass distribution. But the German government is already planning the epic task of how to deliver the vaccine across the country. DW correspondent Tessa Walther reports.
The arena in Berlin was well known for its rock concerts and techno parties. Now it's slated to house one of 6 vaccination centers in Berlin. So far, there isn't much to see, but everything is scheduled to be ready by mid-December. Project manager Albrecht Brömme is convinced things will run smoothly. We timed the process. We allow 4 minutes for each person to get in, take off their coats, sit down, and roll up their sleeves. Then the vaccination team comes in. They disinfect, inject and put some gauze on the wound. The last step is the documentation. That's it. Here, the vaccinated people will then be looked after by doctors and nurses. The patient doesn't have to pay, their health insurance covers the costs. First, the elderly will be vaccinated, then medical personnel, then everyone else. Right now, more than 300 of such vaccination centers are being built throughout Germany. The government hopes this system will simplify logistics and make it possible to vaccinate millions of people in the shortest possible time. People probably won't be able to get the jab from their family doctor until springtime. Before that, they will have to go to the center. I think we'll have to wait for hours at the vaccination center. Thousands of people will be there. I don't care whether I get vaccinated at my family doctor's or the vaccination center. I would prefer going to our family doctor, because they know about my medical history and will take any risks into account. Dr. Sibylle Katzenstein agrees. She was one of the first Berlin family doctors who specialized in treating COVID-19 patients. Vaccinating people is part of her daily routine. When it comes to COVID-19, she says she should be allowed to vaccinate in her own practice. Vaccination is a matter of trust. It's important to know the patient, because every patient reacts differently to unknown risks. I think the general practitioner is best equipped to advise each patient in making a decision about the coronavirus vaccination. She believes she and other family doctors in Germany can handle the vaccination campaign independently. In my opinion, the vaccination centers were probably not necessary. If France can vaccinate its population using family doctors only, why can't Germany? Germany has opted for vaccination centers. Sibylle Katzenstein argues that the best answer is personal consultation. 2 roads, 1 goal. Vaccinating as much of the population as possible, as quickly as possible.
Let's take a look at some other developments in the coronavirus pandemic. An experimental vaccine developed by French drug maker Sanofi and Britain's GlaxoSmithKline has shown an insufficient immune response in clinical trials. The companies hope to come up with a more effective drug by the end of 2021. Australia has canceled the production of its own COVID-19 vaccine after some trial participants returned false positive results for HIV. The government said it would order other vaccines to make up the shortfall. And researchers say the global response to the pandemic has driven a record 7% drop in annual CO2 emissions. The UN says they have to continue to decline at that rate for the next decade to reach international climate goals. The U.S. appears on the verge of approving the country's first coronavirus vaccine. An expert panel of scientists and doctors have reviewed information on the shot and are recommending emergency use of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. Their endorsement paves the way for the country's Food and Drug Adminstration to issue the necessary final approval. Once that happens, the first shots could be given within days. Regulators in Britain and Canada have already approved the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine for use in their countries. Joining me now is Dr. Peter Chin Hong. He is an infectious disease specialist at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Chin Hong, welcome to DW. A panel of experts has endorsed the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. So what has to happen now before it's formally approved?
Well, the advisory panel endorsed it by a vote of 17-4. So the expectation is that in the next 24 to 48 hours, we should have the official emergency use authorization, which will then lead to people being able to be immunized in the first wave.
Okay.
So let's talk about next steps. How quickly could a vaccination program start, and what exactly will it look like?
Well, there is a prequel, so to speak, where there are a few hospitals that have been given the authorization to begin amongst the earliest, and these are the healthcare workers, emergency room staff, intensive care unit staff, people who do diagnostic testing. That's in the healthcare setting. And then in the community, there will be vaccines rolled out to drugstores, to schools, and then they'll begin distributing. The Department of Defense has its own distribution. So you can see that multiple different layers and pipelines to get vaccine in the United States.
Doctor, I have to say, depending on who you talk to or where you are, it's easy to get the impression that there are equal measures of excitement and skepticism around the world when it comes to this vaccine. What's the attitude among the American public?
Well, the attitude is increasing in approval slowly. In summer, it was 50%. Afterwards, thought that the vaccine was being used for political capital in an election year. Then the approval rating went up to about 60% in the last month or so. We're hoping that it's higher, but again, a lot of it was mired by, the current administration.
Dr. Peter Chin Hong, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Indonesia received its first shipment of COVID-19 vaccines from China this week as the government prepares for a mass inoculation program. The vaccine, developed by Sinovac Biotech, will be evaluated by the Indonesian Food and Drug Authority for emergency use. Indonesian clerics are also expected to issue a halal certification for the experimental drug. President Joko Widodo says these are only the first steps and more doses are on the way.
We are also still working to get 1.8 million doses of vaccine to arrive in early January of 2021. Apart from getting the finished version of vaccines, we are also getting 15 million doses of raw vaccine within this month. And later, 30 million doses in January that will be processed by the state-owned pharmaceutical company BioPharma.
And Indonesia isn't the only Asian country looking at Chinese vaccines rather than Western options made by Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and others. Sinovac and China National Biotech Group recently announced approvals for late-stage clinical tests in Bangladesh and Pakistan. Chinese companies have been mostly conducting tests overseas, given so few COVID cases in China itself. For more, we're joined by Dr. Jerome Kim, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute in Seoul. Their partners include the World Health Organization and the Gates Foundation, among others. Dr. Kim, there's been so much news about the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and the AstraZeneca one. And then along comes this Sinovac vaccine, and I feel like we haven't heard that much about this one. What do we know?
Yeah, so we haven't heard in general about vaccines that are not, Western mainstream Operation Warp Speed. But, Chinese vaccine developers, including Sinovac, Sinopharm, and CanSino, have vaccines that have advanced into advanced stage phase 3 testing for safety and efficacy. Sinovac is one of the companies. If you look at its vaccine, it generates what we call neutralizing antibody at a level lower than is seen for AstraZeneca, for instance, or Johnson & Johnson. But it does generate the neutralizing antibody. And it also has a study where their vaccine protected monkeys against infection. So, from a hypothetical perspective, you would say that this vaccine has a chance, and it'll be very interesting to see their data when they're announced. I think it's supposed to be later this month.
So their data has not been announced in the same way that, for example, the Pfizer drugs information has been made available.
Yes, and I think it may be something peculiar to the way the Chinese system is set up, because both Sinovac and Sinopharm have results that have been submitted. Their files have been submitted to the Chinese regulatory authority, the NMPA, for approval. And neither company has commented on their phase 3 efficacy. Now, we did hear about phase 3 efficacy for Sinopharm from one of the sites conducting a trial in the UAE yesterday, 86% for Sinopharm. But we don't have any other information about this. And Sinopharm itself has not commented. So I think it may be something about the way the system is designed to handle efficacy data.
Well, I think we just saw shipments of the Sinovac vaccine to Indonesia. And while China has done a stellar job combating COVID, that wasn't the case in the beginning, and there wasn't much transparency when COVID-19 was still a mysterious illness. So I think it's reasonable for a lot of people to wonder about its vaccine development efforts. Given general transparency issues, stereotypes about corruption connected with the state, what would you say to anyone worried about the Sinovac vaccine, particularly Indonesians who just saw the first shipment arrive in their country?
I think that we have to go with the data, and I guess we will have to trust the National Regulatory Authority in China, the NMPA, to review the safety and efficacy data the way they would review any vaccine. And we know that Sinovac and Sinopharm both have vaccines that are approved by the WHO pre-qualification mechanism, which allows those particular vaccines to be sold to UN agencies for use around the world. So both companies have experience with the UN-based WHO system for approvals. And, I think when they commit to providing vaccine to COVAX, which is the global vaccine allocation and distribution mechanism that 190 countries have signed on to for COVID-19, they're committing to WHO pre-qualification.
Right.
I think that what's going on in Indonesia is actually they're planning to test in effectiveness trials a number of different vaccines, including CanSino, Sinovac, and Sinopharm. So Indonesia is actually planning a rollout of those vaccines.
And very quickly, you're in South Korea. What vaccine is the government there buying?
Actually, the government here, it was announced a few days ago, is actually looking at a number of different vaccines. So right now, the only firm contract is with AstraZeneca, but they've also indicated a desire to purchase from Pfizer, BioNTech, from Moderna, and from Johnson & Johnson, as well as getting their vaccine allocation from the COVAX mechanism.
So they're hedging with a group of vaccines. Dr. Jerome Kim, thank you so much for your time.